Okay, today we are diving deep into the profound educational psychology and cognitive science behind the Montessori method. Now, we've all heard the name Montessori, right? You've maybe seen the wooden toys or those beautifully organized classrooms, but beneath all those aesthetics lies a deeply empirical, scientifically validated approach to human psychology and cognitive development. This isn't just about how children play, it's about how the human brain is fundamentally wired to learn.
Listen to this quote from Maria Montessori. The greatest sign of success for a teacher is to be able to say, "The children are now working as if I did not exist." This is such a powerful quote because it immediately establishes the core psychological theme of our explainer today, which is intrinsic motivation and self-directed learning. Think about that for a second. The ultimate goal isn't dependency on an instructor. It's total autonomous cognitive engagement.
So, here is our roadmap for today. We're going to start with the scientist who taught, then explore the concepts of the absorbent mind and sensitive periods. After that, we'll look at the classroom as a psychological laboratory, delve into the psychology of normalization, and wrap it all up with a century of cognitive science.
All right, kicking things off with Section 1, the scientist who taught, from clinic to classroom.
It is so vital to understand that Maria Montessori wasn't just an armchair theorist or even a traditional teacher by training. She was a scientist first and foremost, and her methods were rooted in really rigorous clinical observation. If we trace her journey back to 1896, against enormous social opposition, she actually became one of Italy's first female medical doctors, graduating from the University of Rome. By 1898, she was working in psychiatric clinics with children who had intellectual disabilities. And it was here that she realized something amazing. When given appropriate materials, these children could actually teach themselves. This clinical success led to her co-directing the orthophrenic school in 1900, and ultimately she translated these psychological insights to typically developing children by opening the first Casa dei Bambini, or Children's House, in 1907.
Now, this clinical background birthed a really foundational concept in her educational psychology. It's called horme. Coming from the Greek word for vital force, horme is basically the natural biological drive towards self-perfection. The crucial takeaway here is that education's true role is not to act like some funnel pouring outside knowledge into an empty vessel. Instead, the educator's actual job is to remove the psychological and physical obstacles that prevent a child's inner nature from unfolding organically.
Moving right along to Section 2, the absorbent mind, how the early brain learns.
Think about how you and I acquire knowledge as adults. It requires conscious effort, right? Deliberate instruction, and let's be honest, usually a ton of coffee to fight off mental fatigue. We'll contrast that with early childhood learning, from birth to age 6. Montessori discovered that young children possess what she called an absorbent mind. They completely unconsciously absorb everything from their environment, the language, the culture, the customs, without any fatigue and without deliberate instruction. This is exactly why traditional top-down instruction often completely fails psychologically with young minds. They just aren't wired for conscious memorization yet. They are wired for environmental absorption. Which brings us to Section 3, sensitive periods of learning, the brain's windows. So Montessori identified these sensitive periods. Think of them as specific biological predispositions, literally temporary windows of time when a child is just perfectly primed to learn specific skills effortlessly. There are 6 main ones. For instance, there's an intense window for language from birth to 6, or a sudden, almost obsessive fascination with tiny details between 1.5 and 2.5. The psychological consequence here is absolutely massive. Missing these temporary biological windows means the exact same skill will require far greater conscious effort and cause much more fatigue to learn later in life. And these sensitive periods evolve across a child's entire development through what Montessori called the planes of development. From birth to age 6 in the Children's House, the focus is heavily on the absorbent mind and sensory exploration. But as children move into the elementary years, from ages 6 to 12, their psychology shifts entirely. The rational mind emerges, along with abstract thinking and a really strong moral sense. Then, from 12 to 15 in middle school, they become what she brilliantly called the social newborn, needing community work and social responsibility. The key here is that education literally has to adapt to the psychology of the age, not the other way around. Let's shift gears a bit for Section 4. The psychological laboratory, engineering the environment.
Okay, so shifting our focus from the internal workings of the brain to the actual physical classroom itself, we hit a truly revolutionary concept in educational psychology: autoeducation, or self-teaching. The environment is engineered with highly specific didactic materials that contain a control of error. This basically means the child can physically see or feel if they've made a mistake and then correct it themselves, entirely without adult intervention. Think about the psychological impact of that. It preserves a child's dignity, completely eliminates the shame of being corrected by an authority figure, and builds immense intrinsic motivation.
But here's the catch. For auto education to actually work, the brain needs time. The 3-hour work cycle reflects how neuroscience confirms deep learning requires sustained focus, which naturally flows through 4 steps: orientation, false fatigue, deep concentration, and finally, satisfaction. When we interrupt this natural cognitive rhythm, like when a bell rings every 40 minutes in a traditional timetable, we literally prevent children from reaching those deep, fulfilling flow states. We are biologically interrupting their concentration.
All right, on to Section 5, the psychology of normalization, healing through focus.
Normalization is honestly one of Montessori's most fascinating psychological observations. It is this profound transformation where children, given the right environment and uninterrupted work, begin to exhibit sustained concentration, spontaneous self-discipline, and a really joyful sociability. And you know what the truly fascinating part is? This isn't some rare unicorn behavior. Montessori realized this joyful focus is actually a child's natural, baseline state when their developmental needs are properly met. On the flip side, we have what she called the deviated child. Behaviors like aggression, destruction, withdrawal, or heavy dependence are not innate naughtiness. From an educational psychology perspective, these are deviations. They're symptoms of an environment that is deeply frustrating the child's biological drive to learn and move. If a child is acting out, the Montessori method doesn't punish the child. It evaluates and changes the environment. It's a total paradigm shift.
Finally, let's wrap up with Section 6, a century of cognitive science, the enduring legacy.
Modern cognitive science is basically just aggressively validating these century-old discoveries right now. Research shows this method deeply respects human dignity, promotes genuine intrinsic motivation over external rewards, and yields highly creative problem solvers. In fact, many famous innovators who changed the world, from Amazon founder Jeff Bezos to the incredibly insightful Anne Frank, were educated in this very system. By following the child's inner blueprint rather than an arbitrary adult timetable, this method has successfully scaled across more than 110 countries and cultures.
Before we wrap, I want to give a quick nod to the comprehensive research that provided the foundation for this explainer. It was compiled by Shahid Amin Durrani, a higher education student specializing in the philosophy of education. It's really a testament to how these historical principles are actively and rigorously studied in global higher education today.
I want to leave you all with this final, kind of provocative thought. If neuroscience and over a century of global practice confirm that children learn best through freedom, concrete experience, and intrinsic motivation, why do our mainstream educational systems still largely operate on the exact opposite principles? It's a question that challenges the very foundation of how we view learning, and it's definitely one worth pondering long after this explainer finishes. Thank you so much for joining me to explore the fascinating educational psychology of the Montessori mind. Keep questioning and keep learning.